And let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Fuchs, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And welcome to today's webinar hosted by 5S Supply. And I'm here with my good friend off screen, Tony Manos. Tony, say hello to everybody.
Yeah, and I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm glad you guys could make it to today's webinar. Jeff and I go way back, and I'm very happy that he'd be willing to do this for us. I just want to mention we will record this, and if it comes out okay, we'll put it up for your viewing later. And then the other part is if you do have any questions during the presentation, just put them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them. And so, Jeff, take it from there.
Okay, very good. Well, it's a pleasure to be with everyone. Thanks for being here in this webinar, How to Deal with Lean During Uncertain Times. Oh gosh, this slide is an eye chart, but I'll save you reading it. My name is Jeff Fuchs. I'm with Nia Vista Consulting, and I have about 23 years of process improvement experience, mostly with Lean, and so that's what we're going to be covering today. And where we'll go is we'll talk a little bit about several different things. What I wanted to do is to provide you with, number one, information about how to persuade people of Lean's benefit during these times, give you some guidance in regards to tools and methods and how you might want to look at using them, things that can help you accelerate your own personal Lean journey. And then I've got a few references and URLs to point out things you can use as resources to explore further and to put into practice. And along the way, you know, we're all spending a lot of time at home these days, working from home. It's good to just recharge, think about Lean, maybe from a few different perspectives, and to get your enthusiasm to dig in and put these things to work. So where we're going to go is, first of all, to take a look at the Toyota production system and what it's turned into with Lean as we know it today, and look at how the Toyota Way management system plays into that. We'll look at a couple of examples very briefly of Toyota in periods of crisis and what that has to teach us today. And then very quickly, we're going to go through some tools and methods. I'm just going to do a quick flyby and make some suggestions about how these tools and methods actually find some application in today's COVID era, and then some suggestions along the way. Even though we're still early in this whole response to COVID, there are some good lessons learned that are emerging, and I just want to share some of those with you. We'll save some time, as Tony said, for Q&A. So I wanted to go back and provide you with a little bit of background on Lean and Toyota and how its Toyota production system kind of led to today. I'm going to boil this timeline down and just kind of cut right to the chase, which is this. When we look at Lean today, it actually has several different DNA strands. There's Henry Ford and his process thinking. There's the quality movement. There's things like training within industry. But by far the strongest taproot, the main genetic code, the DNA, from Lean today really comes from the early Toyota production system. And this timeline just shows a very long history going back into the 1800s for the basis of the Toyota production system and the Toyota Way with the original Toyota Spinning and Weaving Company. And as the company grew and evolved into a conglomerate that included Toyota Motors, they kind of sampled some different things in order to put together a management system. That's what became the Toyota production system. Now, they worked kind of focusing inwards on this for many decades. And then we really began to see something interesting began to emerge only when we get into the 70s and 80s. And by that time, as indicated here with the oil crisis, it was a big incentive for US companies, particularly GM, to kind of tie up with Toyota to learn some things about how they produce small economy cars at a profit, and about this management system that appeared to be at the core of how they did what they did. It was books like Lean Thinking that really brought this into the mainstream and popularized it, and really that's where Lean kind of got its genesis today. So this book, written in 1996 by Womack and Jones, really brought Lean into mainstream parlance. These terms, value, value stream, flow, pull, perfection, really were the core of what people came to understand as Lean, which is in essence a generic non-Toyota version of the Toyota production system. And so important to this is this word thinking. It is a way of thinking. It's a philosophy. It's a way of seeing your work in a different way. And through that different way of seeing, you behave in a different way. And it's behaving in a different way that produces new and significantly different results. So it's important to understand that as we approach lean. Also, that it is about a set of tools and practices, but more than that, it's a way of learning and adapting to new situations. And honestly, in today's COVID era, who isn't getting a head full of that these days? So I think those are important things to understand. And finally, if you look at this definition, you see something that is kind of process and industry agnostic. There's nothing in that definition that we find at the top of the page here that is particular to manufacturing or to automobile manufacturing. Now, that having been said, it's still a bit of a stretch for some, given maybe a very different industry like government or hospitals, or a process that looks very different from assembly line manufacturing today. Sometimes this lean term is a bit off-putting, and it gets appended by manufacturing. So a lot of people know lean as lean manufacturing, and they take a look at like an image like this, a Toyota production line, and they say that doesn't apply to us. Lean doesn't apply to us because we're not a high rate, low variation manufacturer. We don't have assembly lines. We don't make widgets. And those are all points well taken. But I think it's important to not have that image of Toyota today really dominate our thinking. If we think back to how Toyota began and the first times that they really began to pull together some elements into a management system that led to the Toyota production system, we have to think back to those times. So I just wanted to paint a picture with you of what that actually looked like. This image, which was collected from a bomber assessment of damage, really looks at one of Toyota's factories and shows some extensive damage in and all around this. And really, it was a factory in this case in an industry that had really been bombed into submission at the end of World War II. And then with occupying forces that came in, it was really the rebuilding of the Japanese economy and Japanese industries like Toyota. So what did that look like? A few bullets here to try and describe exactly what the environment was. Factories and their equipment were damaged. They were in terrible disrepair, and they were in need of dramatic modifications in order to actually do the production that was required. The experienced workforce was largely lost. They were sent off with guns in their hands to go fight in World War II. And many of the experts who were left behind in order to bring people into the factory and teach them this way of working that these experienced folks left behind, they were lost as well. There was an extremely limited access to capital because the economy was pretty much being stood up from its ashes. Raw material was hard to come by. There were many outages. There was rationing of key resources. All that was going on. So the market for cars was also just beginning to emerge from the ashes. There were short production runs. It wasn't sedans that they were used to making, it was buses and trucks and other things. They were basically taking jobs with the interest of generating cash and of helping the company meet payroll and survive to see tomorrow. All of that actually was in the existing markets. Toyota had to look to other markets from the government, from US occupying forces, repair of US automobiles. All of that was done, again, in an effort to try to help the company survive. And it was a challenge. There was a great deal of reshuffling. The company was near collapse. It was reorganized several times. And all of that led to layoffs, a great deal of labor strife, union strikes, and so on. And I wonder, just in describing all of this, if any of that kind of sounds familiar to some of you today. And I think that it does, unfortunately. And what we begin to see from taking this perspective of Toyota post-World War II is to see that many of the situations that we see today were there at the genesis of the Toyota production system. It was in times remarkably like we're in now that saw the origins of the Toyota production system. So some of the images that we carry today of modern Toyota with its advanced production lines and with its lean philosophy actually started out looking completely different. And I think it's very recognizable today. So just wanted to kind of share that perspective. And I think it underscores the suitability of lean in solution to some of the problems that we're all experiencing. One other thing that I wanted to point out was this. Lean, as I said, is a generic version of a couple of different things, actually. Most notably, we know it's part of the Toyota production system, but we also need to understand that there's a good deal of the Toyota way that is suffused into what it is that we know of as lean today. The thing is that in the West, and particularly in the United States, we have kind of grabbed onto certain things that are recognizable and familiar to us. And it's part of the reason why we've struggled with getting into lean manufacturing, and on the other end, trying to get out of, go beyond lean manufacturing. The tools and the techniques, the methods of lean, I think are very visible. They were very approachable, and they were some of the first things that Americans kind of understood and embraced. But there's another element to this, and that's that Toyota way. It's over here. The diagram is on the left-hand side of this graphic, and it has these elements of challenge, Kaizen, and so on, that are less well acknowledged, I think, especially in Western parlance. The tools and methods of lean really reside in this diagram over here on the right. But the diagram on the left, the Toyota way, is like a low-level operating system that has existed in Toyota Motor Corporation and its precursor company since, again, the late 1800s. And it's more like a low-level operating system, like on your computer. That works in the background, that is less visible, I think, to the user. There are things that ride on top of that in the form of the Toyota production system, and some of the tools and methods that we know of in industry and manufacturing, those are very, very well known. So it's almost like on this operating system, we have a software platform like the Microsoft Office suite. And we as Americans seem to have zoomed in on Excel, like as an example. And we've really kind of focused on just a key element of an overall software suite. And on below that, an operating system that has escaped our notice, I think, up until very recently. So the Toyota way philosophy and management system is something that I think deserves a great deal of attention. And I'm just going to highlight that with a couple of examples of how Toyota has responded in crises. So one of these was back in the 90s with a Toyota supplier, Aisin Seiki, that was the producer of almost all of their proportional valves to the tune of about 30,000 to 33,000 units per day across the entire Toyota enterprise. And they were working in a just-in-time basis, very low levels of working inventory, and very small level of these SKUs on hand. Well, on February 1st, 1997, the Aisin Seiki factory outside of Tokyo burned to the ground. Complete loss. And it was projected that working at their best possible speed, it would be weeks, 6 weeks, before they could get back into production. At that point, an all hands on deck call went out to Toyota's suppliers. They launched out several hundred of their engineers who went out in small teams, worked with these suppliers, and managed to put together 60 different supplier lines scattered across a subsection of these suppliers. And get this, within just 2 days, they were able to get pilot production samples into Toyota, and the entire enterprise of these 60 some odd suppliers were able to get to full production in less than a week, in less than 7 days. So Toyota did a lot here. In addition to the engineers, they also provided financial incentives. But this was a remarkable response to this catastrophic crisis. And some of the things that we learn here from this crisis are these. Number one, when challenged on this just-in-time low level of inventory, Toyota doubled down and they essentially said, this approach is the right balance of both efficiency and risk. We, however, used our relationships to actually create some capabilities in our suppliers. They did, in fact, change things in order to actually make it more possible to redirect things in a crisis to suppliers that can handle the loss of production if one happens to go down. So there was a reduction in variation, there was changes of tooling, there were redundancies and fallback type of plans that were put in place with the various suppliers. But this interlocking system, what they call keiretsu, of a networking ecosystem of a company and its immediate suppliers, was something that was also validated, and they doubled down on this. And so this has a lot to say about what we can learn today, I think. And it wasn't, as you can see here, the tools and the methods of Lean, it was really the relationships. It was some of that low-level operating system, human interaction and relationships, as I said, that really proved to be so powerful in this instance. We can see the same type of thing that happened during the 08-09 recession. And I'm sure, like me, you probably saw in the paper during that time an almost daily parade of numbers, just in the thousands, of Detroit 3 automakers who were laying off employees. Toyota was not immune. They did experience a sales drop of almost 50%, and it was the first time that they had a financial loss, really, in the company's history since the 1950s. But unlike their Detroit counterparts, Toyota did not cut their permanent workforce. They cut temps, they cut bonuses, they cut overtime, but they didn't cut people. People are the carriers of organizational culture. We've made culture into a competitive weapon. And so they did do some things that were necessary in order to cut cost. And you can see those things listed here. They also redesigned their entire strategy. And instead of leaving people adrift, wondering where the company was going, they did put together what they call Global Vision 2020 that helped to explain a direction to everybody and get them aligned. They also did things that were unexpected and kind of zigged when everybody else zagged. And the bottom line is they were able to actually get their lines across the Toyota enterprise to operate at about 85% capacity, somewhere there, somewhere in the low 80s. And these lines run at a very, very tight margin. They were able to make a profit through the use of, it says here, TPS, the Toyota Production System, and Toyota Business Practices. So this was an important takeaway. And one of the ways that, the way that they did that is exemplified in one of their factories, which was down in San Antonio, the truck plant, which was just getting ready to open after having been freshly made and ready to go live. All 1,800 employees, instead of going into work and going to a production job, instead went into little learning areas inside the factory. They called them training loops, that were basically small production lines that ran in a loop inside the main production line inside the factory. And they were essentially there to help people train and to hone their skills. And so, you know, this was a rather remarkable approach. It was described by this one Toyota assembly worker, and you can see the quote here. But the bottom line is they were able to do things that, that other companies were unable to do. They already had a remarkably low 150 defects per 100 vehicles, which was already among the leading factories that were out there all across different auto companies. But through this training and this deliberate approach, they were able to achieve an 80% reduction in those defects per 100 vehicles by the time that they opened to full rate production. Later on, as demand spiked in this whole cash for clunkers program that we had across the country, they were able to make a remarkable change in takt time that was on the order of more than 25%, which was really remarkable. It hadn't been seen in factories like that ever since. So here's some things that we learned from these stories. Number one, we see that Lean today has a strong Toyota heritage. And looking back, we see that Lean in all of its, the Toyota production system with all of its tools, that's one key thing, but it's really the Toyota way that we see that's so powerful in times of scarcity, turmoil, and adversity. So both of these things are really important. But in these examples, we see how lean manufacturing's improvement methods are useful, yes, but the real power comes from the power of people. It's the relationship that you have with your internal employees. It's the relationship that you cultivate with your external suppliers, and an ethos that is different than we find in many large business enterprises like Toyota. So the question then I put to you is, with this now as a set of learning lessons, what parts of lean would you turn to in the current crisis? And a reminder again, it's never too late to start building these relationships. It's always good to do that during easy times, but if it has to be during times of adversity, there's no time like the present. So with that as a backdrop, I just want to jump into some things. First is just a quick flyby of some tools and techniques that we found are very helpful during this COVID challenge, and then a set of recommendations that we can offer, I think. First is training within industry, and this has been around for a while. I think for those of you who may not have heard of it, it's been around since World War II. It has 4 key elements to it: job instruction, job methods, job relations, and program development. I'm just going to go very briefly into a couple of these and how they're useful in the current environment, and focus in really very much on specifically job instruction. So job instruction was something that took your best technicians in a workplace and developed them into your best teachers. And you know that these are 2 entirely different skills. So this was absolutely key in order to bring people into the factory and get them up to speed. And job instruction really taught how to apply the techniques of good instruction that we all know, I think, very well today. But in those days was really kind of a strong advancement to shifting the focus onto the teacher, saying things like, if the student has not learned, then the teacher hasn't taught. It's teaching technique, and how do we build up that capability? So everybody that was a graduate of this program had one of these 2-sided hip cards. I'm very proud of this one book that I've got, the original bound version of those TWI documents. It really is kind of a boon to have and to share with people during these times when we're trying to bring people up to speed. And so this is an example of the type of thing that has been in the lean tool bag for a long time and is now really popping out front and center when it comes to some of the skills that we need to develop during this COVID era. So there's job instruction that helps new instructors teach old and new processes to new employees. There's this combination with job instruction and job methods that once we get people up to speed, actually enables people to innovate and to improve the processes that they're a part of. So it's not just do the work, but improve the work. And then job relations is something that helps leaders of all kinds try to systematically approach resolving workplace differences, because there's going to be a lot of friction and a lot of conflict during these high tension times. So all of these are really very useful. And I'll just point out as an example, this is an image from Lean Frontiers website. The folks over there, Jim and Dwayne, are doing a fantastic job. And this is one of their master trainers, Patrick Grout, who's teaching one of his kids, his daughter, how to wash her hands properly. And I have to admit, I'm kind of a geek. I do the same thing myself. I've got 2 young daughters, grade school age. And so I went to the World Health Organization's website and found some of their documentation, which honestly was not all that great. And I just turned that into a TWI job instruction format. And I got myself some gel here that is kind of a hand lotion that you can light up with fluorescent light and kind of show what your hand washing effectiveness is. And we walked through this technique. It made me, as a new teacher, a little bit more competent to teach my kids, which I think parents, it's one of the toughest jobs in the world, is to teach your own kids. But this was an enormously strong crutch in being able to do that. So TWI is actually one of the ways that it's the instruction technique that we use in the military even today. And I got a dose of that when I was in the Army. And it's really an opportunity, I think, when you see needs, when we go for reopening and training employees and new ways of doing things, it's a great tool to have in your tool belt. So do consider that. There's this whole notion of standard work, and I'll just briefly kind of describe the fact that we're all trying to develop new standards now. And one of the ways that we define this is content sequence timing outcomes. What's the content? What are the steps? What are the sequence that I should be following? How much time should each one of these steps take? And if I do these steps in these sequence using this amount of time, what is the outcome that I should get from doing the job in this way? So this is a great way to kind of teach people some of the fundamental basics and clue them in as to why it is that we're doing the job the way that we're doing it. This all follows a plan, do, check, act cycle. That standard now is something that we set out there to as a baseline, as a basis for how it is that the process should run. And off of that basis, we're able to execute this improvement cycle to find gaps in performance and to identify the need for improvement. So we want people to be able to do that on a routine basis all the time. And the standards are an important way for moving that forward. Some of you are familiar with Toyota Kata. I'll just briefly mention that here. It's been an awesome tool for being able to coach and develop others in not only the ways that, that we apply the Toyota production system, my gosh, just about everything else that we're doing, where we're trying to coach and develop others to learn new skills. So we are way beyond this predictable zone. With COVID these days, we are all in the unpredictable zone. We are all learners in new territory. And so this is an excellent tool that people have really kind of embraced. It resonates with a lot of folks. And it's just a systematic way that a coach works with a practitioner and helps them to improve a process that they're a part of or that they're helping to improve with others. So it's a very useful technique. And I'll just share this with you. This comes from the website of a group called Catalysis, which is all about lean healthcare and helping practitioners in the healthcare industry. Mount Sinai Morningside Hospital is in, it's an urban community hospital in New York. They have an incident command center that was reconfigured and was designed to put into practice rapid changes. Ever since they opened this center, leaders have practiced for 2 years in mock mass casualty events, and now they're using it for COVID-19 response. The management team huddles multiple times daily and reviews information on 10 digital dashboards inside this command center. As problems are identified, a work group of stakeholders quickly convenes in the lean lab, and solutions are identified within just 1 or 2 hours. The solutions are presented to the leadership team for awareness, and then this lean team goes and they take the role of operationalizing these process changes with the appropriate stakeholders. So it's impossible, they say, to catalog all of the rapid cycle improvement events that they've done using this modified PDCA technique that looks a lot like Kata. As the pace quickens and as they evolve, they say that their work has already been outdated. They built upon it and changed it so that it's unrecognizable from where they started. But they've put all of their standard work now on the web, and they have done this as a way to inform and inspire others, other process teams who are on similar journeys all across the globe. So this Kata stuff, it really does work, and this is a living demonstration of that. I think in addition to that, there are things that we've all kind of picked up as lean practitioners. 5S, visual management, mistake proofing. These are great techniques to learn in order to apply in the workplace. And just to kind of cut to the chase here in the bottom line, we want to make things clear, simple, easy, hassle-free, self-balancing, self-correcting. When customers walk into our establishments, we want to make our systems clear, easy, transparent, so that they can present the right behaviors and help keep everybody safe, themselves, your employees, everyone. So that's some of the value of some of these things, right? So I'm going to skip over a couple of things in here and just, you know, there are some other things that I just wanted to point to with respect to things like value stream mapping that are, I think, very helpful these days as we do things like map out processes and try and find the best way to do things. But let me, since we're running short of time, just jump forward to some of the lessons learned that I wanted to share. And it kind of looks like this. The first thing is that we're all experimenters now. We all are conducting our own experiments, but we shouldn't let our experiments stand in isolation. Please look across the full range of ideas that are out there and let your experiments be informed by others. So this is an example. This is students inside a grade school classroom in China. And you can see the teacher kind of got them involved in making their own little distancing hats. And so that's been effective in this classroom in China to kind of keep that social distance and give young people engaged. So this is a very useful idea. And this is the type of thing that I think intuitively we could see translated into other domains. Unfortunately, maybe some of these things don't translate exactly well. I think we should, again, let our experiments be informed by others, but always keep in mind that the specific conditions and the context for your environment really matter. So don't jump to conclusions, always take a look, solve your problem, but you can be informed by other people's experiments. Maybe this is a useful idea and concept, maybe not so much. But like responsible scientists or doctors, we want to be aware and scanning all the time of some of the other experiments that are going on out there. But just like a good patient, it would be unwise for you just to take somebody else's heart medication, for example. So we're trying to let our experiments be influenced by others. Lean practitioners and consultants like myself, as an example, we don't really make our money by going out there and having all the answers. What we know is a systematic problem-solving approach. What we know is a methodology for systematically finding the answers and getting there efficiently. So that's important to understand. Next, we want to be able to challenge better all the time our own biases and assumptions and those of others. So being a good lean coach really means that we watch for these things. We provide objective third-party assessment and observations and recommendations and feedback. So we're doing that all the time. We're discovering forward as coaches. We don't have all the answers, but we know what practices work well in the majority of contexts. And now we're bringing that and introducing that to a learner. So some of the best questions that I personally am able to ask, I think, from being a good coach are really things like, how do you know that? And challenging people's problem-solving assumptions. So this is the type of thing that we're asking all along the full cycle of Plan, Do, Check, Act, and it's a very successful way for doing things. And you know, it's like, as an example here with the Air Force, this is their standard problem-solving methodology. This is something that works in a wide range of contexts. And at every step along this cycle, we want to challenge biases and assumptions that are built into our problem solving and that we need to constantly work as human beings to do better with. So part of this is really, I think, very important as we get into the fall. We're coming into election season. And I'll just say that there's a lot of information, and unfortunately, there's a lot of disinformation that's out there. We're seeing an explosion of different ways of interpreting information on things like COVID. I think it's only going to become more heated and unfortunately more contentious as we get into the fall. And I think it's just advisable for everybody to step back, take a deep breath, and challenge the assumptions that we see out there and challenge our own assumptions and really how we know things. And so this is one example. This is taken from the Georgetown University website, and this is one way, one template for how it is that we kind of question and probe and challenge the veracity of things that we find online. Who's the author? What's their purpose? Do they display objectivity? Is there accuracy and currency to the various links that they have here? And it takes time, it takes effort, but this information that's being presented to us is literally life and death. And much of the information that we rely on in order to do things like run our business enterprise require information that is as free as possible of biases and assumptions that would undermine the validity of some of that information. So I offer this to you very quickly as one example of how it is that we challenge biases and assumptions. We should also be able to kind of separate out good arguments from bad ones. And so if you've ever studied debate in school, I didn't. Later in life, much later, I ran into books like this, an illustrated book of bad arguments, which is a kind of a funny way to see the whole taxonomy, the whole range of various bad arguments, and recognizing how often I run into this in company boardrooms and in things that I see online. And so as we're making decisions about how to move forward, it's important for us to be able to pick these things apart and to really kind of see good arguments and separate them from bad. So I offer all of those as some ideas that could be helpful. I guess one other thing that I'll pass along to you is one other important tip, I think, which is to plan for the long term. This is a picture that shows the Japanese island chain. They have a long history of earthquakes and tsunamis, and a lot of these have occurred over the centuries. But unfortunately, there are some important lessons to learn for how you build buildings, for where you put these buildings, and those lessons don't always get conveyed in the span of a normal person's lifetime. This is something that you find in Japan and a few other countries. This is a series of tsunami stones. These are reminders from past generations to future ones. These are physical artifacts that serve as warnings of the high watermark of devastation, which people in their daily lives may overlook or forget. They're meant to influence thinking and behavior. And I just leave you with that as a thought. We do want to kind of learn the important lessons that COVID has to teach us, and think long term. Think about how it is that we create sustainable business, incorporating some of these lessons that we're investing a lot to learn right now. So very quickly, here's a set of do's and don'ts that follow from some of the things that I've shown you. I'm not going to read all of these, but suffice it to say, I think some of these are pretty straightforward. Others may be counterintuitive. And so all of these slides are available. Tony can get them to you. Contact him over at 5S Supply, and you can follow up not only with some of the details that are here, but also with some of the links that I've provided. I guess my final thought to you is this. This is an image that my sister sent to me of the 1918 pandemic, and there are echoes that we hear in the media about the parallels between what happened then 100 years ago and what's happening today. It's important that we learn those lessons. I guess I would also point out that immediately following the 1918 pandemic was a decade of the Roaring '20s. And it was a halcyon era during the United States and around the globe, really. And it marked some very significant advancements. It's important that we learn the lessons of the pandemic of 1918, but I think it's also important to remember that the Roaring '20s followed very shortly thereafter. Never forget some of the lessons that the flu pandemic can teach us in the COVID era, but also don't forget to remember some of the lessons of the Roaring '20s. It could be that better times are just around the corner, and they certainly will happen sooner rather than later if we all work forward in that direction. So with that, I'll pause here and turn things over. I think we've got time, Tony, don't we, for a Q&A. Perhaps there's a few questions we can fit in here quick.
Yeah, we get a couple questions. Hey, Jeff, one of them was, where do I find more information about job instructions?
Oh, job instruction. The folks over at the TWI Institute do a fantastic job there. I think that they provide some excellent workshops and training. And in addition to that, I believe all of the original TWI materials have all been scanned. So you don't need a bound volume like I have. They're up there on the web, and they're available as a public resource for people to learn on their own.
Okay, good. And we had another one here, the examples of standard work, but how do I apply it in the office?
Yeah, right. So standard work, again, in that definition, if I have a job that I'm doing, it's these steps in this sequence using this amount of time, and I should get these outcomes again and again. And so it's a way for people to kind of design a set of practices and say, here's what here's what I should be doing in the steps. Here's how long it should take. Even putting together this presentation here in my own office, it's a derivative of some other things that I had already put together. It should take me X amount of time. And it didn't. It actually took me longer. And I found that, like we all know, the internet is a sinkhole. And I get sucked into finding cool pictures to kind of incorporate. And that's where all my time went. And so that's something that I need to be mindful of in terms of technique the next time I do this. That's one simple example. But whether it's physical work in a factory or if it's knowledge or service work in an office, that definition of content, sequence, timing, outcomes is a really useful thing in standard work definition, no matter where you apply it.
All right, Jeff, here's another question. Do you think there should have been more national attention to training its people in order to stay safe? There was a high focus on the tools, so to say, stickers, etc., but seemingly less on new ways of living. What would you suggest to governments or consider a learning topic regarding training on COVID-19?
Oh boy, gee, how much time do we have? I think a short answer to that is yes, there are some things that I think we've shortchanged ourselves on. I think that the investment of time and attention into training is something that oftentimes is hard to justify. There's a benefit that's really kind of fuzzy and you're not quite sure how to dollarize it, but the cost of the training, boy, that's easy to quantify. And so in the whole equation, the calculus of cost benefit, I think training often gets shortchanged. Now we're seeing that come back to bite us. And now we see that it's difficult for us to get new people aboard and to train them on jobs. The jobs themselves aren't intrinsically difficult. It's that we've made it so difficult using some of the rickety training that I think we've invested in over the years. Hopefully now this will all kind of bring all that to a different light. And the flexibility and the adaptability that we require in modern business going forward, I think is really going to be a very strong, I think, reason to invest in training. And it's one of the things that I hope in terms of a lesson coming out of COVID that we as human beings and Americans don't forget very soon.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. One quick question. If they need to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
Oh, let's see. The best way to get a hold of me is jeff@neovistaconsulting.net, all one word. And I'm very happy to share ideas back and forth. And these slides are available through Tony, and I can also get them to you if you like.
All right. Well, I'd like to say thank you to Jeff and everyone that attended. We appreciate your time today. Any last thoughts, Jeff?
Listen, everybody's in a new learning and adaptation zone. Take a deep breath. Do your best out there. Remember some of those lean tools and methods, yes, but really focus on that learning, that adaptation, that growth together, and I think we'll all get through this.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.